Greetings, friends, and Happy New Year's Eve! I thought on the last day of the year, maybe it would be a fun exercise to look back at what's happened throughout the year. And that's what all news agencies are doing. So, of course, we got to put the plaid original spin on it. So instead of, on this podcast, looking for a general summary of everything that happened in the last year, I want to specifically look at what happened to world leaders in 2011. That's right. In this version of In Other News, what happened with leaders worldwide over the course of the last year, because it's been a banner year for people getting thrown out of office or thrown out of breathing oxygen on planet Earth. And for those of you in class or have ever been in my class, you know we do the World Regions World Leader Death Watch, and man, they're dropping like flies. Closest ever that we've come to doing a full-on tic-tac-toe board of death, because so many people have just disappeared from the scene. So in no specific order, maybe just kind of bop around the regions, let's do a 2011 year in review. What up with world leaders? Tremendous amount of turnover. It's crazy. I have to rewrite the whole textbook and redo class and everything else. We've lost so many folks. First off, let's look at some of the dictators and autocrats that have flown out of office, because general trend for 2011 was, 2011 was a pretty good year for democracy. Okay, that is power to the people. Now, not all of the places that have thrown out leaders or are having revolutions are democracies yet. But if you're just looking at democracy in terms of a movement that is putting power to the people of a country instead of one or two leaders, 2011 was a pretty good year. 2011 in review was also a pretty bad year for dictators outright. That is, individuals who hold all the power in their state. It was a really bad year to be a dictator. And authoritarian figures, broadly speaking, it was a bad year for them too. Now, what's the difference? Well, a dictator kind of holds all the cards, like a Kim Jong-Il or Muammar Gaddafi, usually backed by the military. Makes all the decisions. There's no bones or even pretensions that it's a democracy or anything else in a true dictatorship. But authoritarian figures worldwide, and I'll throw in people like Vladimir Putin, Russia, a democracy, but let's face it, he holds a lot of the power. It's not a good year for him either. So let's kind of bop around the world here. Look, what up with world leaders in 2011? And we have to start with the Arab Spring. Of course, that's where a lot of this started, this movement away from authoritarianism or a dictatorship, power in the hands of few, really started in Tunisia. Lo and behold, who would have ever predicted that? Nobody, not even the Tunisians. But they had this dude, Zine Ben Ali, the now former president of Tunisia, that had been in charge for, I don't know, 10 or 20 years in a pretty much sham democracy. And people in Tunisia apparently had enough, and this year, 2011, they decided to chuck him out. He was one of the few leaders who was smart enough to see the storm coming, or while the storm of revolt was happening in his country, he was one of the few smart enough to get the hell out of his country. So I don't know exactly where Ben Ali is. He's not dead. He was ejected out of the presidency and out of the country, and is probably hanging out somewhere in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis, Saudi Arabia is kind of the a home for orphaned world leaders and dictators. Anytime you get thrown out or people are trying to kill you, Saudi Arabia will take you in and you can retire there, especially if you're an Arab leader that they're friends with. So, first off, Tunisia, a place nobody was paying attention to a year ago, has become the center of the spark that started the Arab Spring, and they were the first to chuck out a world leader. President Ali is gone, probably in Saudi Arabia. Of course, the bigger deal is that the spark that was Tunisia turned into a full-on explosion in Egypt. Not to diss my Tunisian friends, Tunisia's an awesome place, but Egypt is a serious power player within the Middle East. A gigantic population, 60, 70, 80 million people, a core of the Arab world, period. And so it's a much bigger deal that they chucked out their dictator-in-chief, Hosni Mubarak, who succumbed to the uprisings produced by the Arab Spring after months of revolt. And was he a dictator? Yeah, kind of. But again, it's more of an authoritarian figure in terms of Egypt was what we call a one-party state. They had sham elections. It was a sham democracy. Why do we call it a one-party state? Because Hosni Mubarak, they had elections and they would run for office, except Hosni Mubarak's party was the only party on the ballot. So he was the only one to vote for, which is why he was president for over 30 years. And supported by the West and the U.S. and lots of other entities. So He was not as smart as Ben Ali. He decided to stick around, and now he's under house arrest in Egypt, where he is awaiting trial, which keeps getting put off because of his poor health. He'll probably not survive out 2012. He is a broken man in body and spirit now. Because that's the thing with dictators. A lot of them think that the people really like them. I mean, they get so isolated from the general public and so insulated by yes men all around them, or the military surrounding them and protecting them, that over the course of years and then decades, everybody just says, "You're great, Hosni, you're great." And Hosni really thought he was great. And then this revolution's like, "Oh, what? People hate me?" So he's probably going to die of a broken heart, if not a broken skull, here before the end of next year. But either way, he's out of power. So President number 2 gone, Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. Which brings us to Commandant-in-Chief, Arab leader lost, third Arab leader lost this year. Our good friend, our post-good friend, Muammar Gaddafi. Crazy, mad dog Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. The Arab Spring, of course, then headed over to Libya and was roundly supported by not only the United Nations in general, which kind of allowed an international coalition to help out the rebels in Libya, but specifically entities like France and the UK and NATO, which stepped in to also help overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. And of course, Muammar said, and this was predicted by me multiple times, that he was not going to go without a fight. He's not going to retire to Saudi Arabia. By the way, the Saudis hated his guts. He didn't have the option of retiring to Saudi Arabia. So Muammar stuck it out, and then somebody stuck it to him. Eventually, he got killed, of course, this year. So Muammar Gaddafi retired from power. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi retired from power in Libya after 40 years of rule, and he was a true-on dictator. There's no getting around that. They didn't even have fake elections. They didn't even pretend to be a democracy in Libya. So he was retired from office and retired from planet Earth as well. And that leads us to a couple of other Arab leaders which have not been thrown from power yet and not been thrown from life, but probably will next year, or this year coming up starting tomorrow. And that is, of course, the Arab Spring is also still besieging Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, who I thought for a long time was going to do the smart thing and try to open up the government and open up the political system and let the protesters at least have a vent of their frustration. But unfortunately, he has been apparently led around by the nose of his, by the generals, military leadership of Syria, which have just taken a hard line and killed everybody. And now I'm saying there's no way that Bashar al-Assad and his regime are going to last another year. That they have made it plain that they're not going to back down, much like Muammar Gaddafi, which means, okay, then the only way the revolution will end is with your death or getting kicked out of the country, one or the other. So al-Assad, the other Arab leader that's under siege in Syria, and then down in Yemen you have Ali Salah, President Ali Salah, who's still in power, even though his country's been in revolution since even before 2011. Yemen's been hot in 2009 and 2010. And people are still aggravated and frustrated on the streets of Yemen, and he actually has signed a pledge, a kind of peace treaty with entities, Arab entities from outside the country, brokered this peace deal, that he has supposedly signed that says he's going to step down from power in 3 months, and that was like a month ago. So supposedly he's going to be gone. And again, another authoritarian regime, both in Syria and Yemen, that have just taken a hit here in 2011. Those two are still surviving. My Yemenis friends and Syrian friends, you still have 12 hours left to try to get rid of those two before the end of the year. Predicting out ahead, I can't see them lasting out 2012, but that's for another podcast. Who else did we lose in 2011? Well, thank goodness. Ding dong, the Jong is dead. A full-on, worst-case scenario dictator, Kim Jong-Il of North Korea, got his ass retired from planet Earth just a couple weeks ago, just in time for the holidays. I know you should never laugh at the death of somebody, but this dude was just bad. There's really nothing redeeming about the Kim family at this point. Of course, Kim Jong-un, his idiot savant son, has taken over control of the country, but after almost 2 decades of disastrous, psychotic, insane dictatorial rule of North Korea, Kim Jong-un finally gets retired. I'm sorry, Kim Jong-il finally gets retired to hopefully some sub-region of hell. Okay? So North Korea now lost their leader, and the world's lost another hilarious dictator to make fun of. But it wasn't all just dictators and authoritarian figures who we lost or were dethroned this year. Although these folks come close. And now I got to go back to Europe and make fun of Italy's Prime Minister Clown-in-Chief, Silvio Berlusconi, who after a decade of disastrous rule for Italy, finally was convinced to step down just a month and a half ago. Woo! I mean, Italy's such an awesome place, and this guy, was he a dictator? No, Italy's a democracy. However, this guy was leaning on authoritarian in terms of he controlled almost all the press of Italy, most of the media, most of the news stations, and so he had, as a leader of a country, way too much control, and he's a billionaire, way too much wealth and way too much control over means of communication and information to be, you know, a legitimate democratic leader. I'm sorry to my Italian friends who kept voting him into office, but I mean, he had a propaganda machine that to continue to stay in power long after he should have been gone. And he's been, you know, accused of multiple felonies and misdemeanors. He's in court nonstop. He hangs out with hookers. I mean, the guy was just a mess. But even if you were willing to look over all that stuff and say, well, he was never convicted of those felonies, which is what his people say all the time. It's like, yes, but you're still a world leader who has multiple felony counts against you, and you're caught with hookers all the time. Okay, let's forget that. Let's pretend that never happened. The Italian economy's been decimated under this dude. They're in debt up to their eyeballs, and they're getting ready to be the next country to default and cause a collapse of the euro, possibly. So, just a terrible mess of a leader in Silvio Berlusconi that got finally retired this year out of Italy. And that leads me to stay in Europe for just one more, and that is our good man, Vladimir Putin. Now, did Putin get thrown from power? No. But it has not been a good year for Putin, and it's actually just the last few months. Vladimir Putin, of course, president of Russia from 2000 to 2008, and prime minister since then, and is going to be the next president. I'm going to stand by that. But this guy was unshakable, unstoppable, ironclad. The Russian people, he's beloved. He really brought the country back from the brink of, you know, utter disaster in 2000 to get Russia back into being a world power and being semi-rich again and moving forward. And, of course, he's a living legend, having wrestled bears and shot tigers and scuba dived and, I don't know, wrestled submarines. The dude has done it all. And anyway, he has this whole body of hype around him, and we, on the outside of Russia, have been led to believe that 80 to 90% approval ratings for this guy all the time. And of course, they changed the Constitution so he could run for president again. Everybody's like, well, of course, he's going to win presidency again. I'm still suggesting that's going to happen. However, he got booed after he announced he was going to run for the Russian presidency again. He then got booed at a wrestling match. And ever since then, now we've had this kind of disintegration. Again, it wasn't even a few months. We're talking like the last month and a half. There's been this disintegration of public support for him that seriously has caught the entire world and Vladimir Putin by surprise. We all been like, what? We thought the dude was beloved. It is a real chink in his armor. Cracks are appearing. And this could be a disastrous 2012 for Putin if this continues. Again, I'll save that for the next podcast. I think he's going to survive and be the next president of Russia again, but not a good year for authoritarian figures in general. Now, again, Russia's a democracy, but Putin, much like Berlusconi in Italy, had an inordinate amount of political power and power over the press and power over a lot of different things. A little bit too much power, more power than a democratically elected leader really should have. So he and his political party, United Russia, did hold way too many of the cards. And maybe that's what the Russian people got pissed off about. I don't know. Maybe they're looking at the Arab Spring. Maybe they're looking at dictators falling around the world and decided to strike back against Putin, a guy who's done a pretty solid job for Russia. Anyway, those are kind of the dictators, authoritarian figures, and other folks we've lost around the world or just in trouble around the world here in 2011. And I do want to point out that there are some on injured reserve. What I mean by that? Well, there's a whole lot of other leaders that actually kind of had some bad luck in 2011. It was not a good year. Again, more holistic general theme. Not a good year to be a world leader. World leaders on IR right now, an injured reserve that had a bad year. Hugo Chavez diagnosed with cancer. Hugo Chavez, president of Venezuela and left-wing clown extraordinaire. diagnosed with cancer, treated for cancer in Cuba multiple times, still holding office, never stepped down, I don't believe, for any given point. But just this week, Argentinian President Christina Kirchner diagnosed with a type of lymphoma, I think, type of cancer. And they're not alone. Actually, the president of Paraguay was diagnosed with cancer this year. It's really bizarre that this all kind of happened. And just to, before I tip off this hilarious thing that Hugo Chavez says, the current president of Brazil, who just took office in 2011, Dilma Rousseff, she actually is a survivor of cancer already. And the person she took over for, Lula da Silva, was also a cancer survivor. That's in Brazil. So in this bizarre irony, or not irony, kind of just bizarre twist of fate, a lot of Latin American leaders ended up being diagnosed with cancer. And that brings me back to the reason I thought about this was Hugo Chavez in a state address just last week suggested that maybe this was not a coincidence and that possibly the United States CIA has a cancer biological weapon that they are slipping into all the leftist leaders of Latin America. So all you, and this is Chavez's words, all you Latin American leaders better watch out because the CIA might get you cancer. Because how can this be a coincidence? What a buffoon. Sorry to my Venezuelan friends who might be supporters of Hugo Chavez. And Hugo was quick to point out that he wanted to make sure that his other extremely leftist buddy, Evo Morales in Bolivia, he said, Evo, let's watch out for you, Evo. They're going to give you cancer next. What a goober. To kind of finish up the injured reserve, you also have Pakistani President Asif Zardari, who had a stroke about 3 weeks ago. I actually thought he was not going to recover from that, not make it back to the presidency, but somehow he did. Boy, that guy's a survivor. Whew. He's about as corrupt as Berlusconi, and not a good leader, and now in poor health. But he had a stroke and had to go to the UAE, I think, for treatment, and but somehow got back, and he's back in power for a little bit longer. I already mentioned that Ali Salah in Yemen, another besieged leader, actually got bombed in 2011. Somebody threw a mortar round into a mosque on his personal compound and blew him up. He has burns over, I don't know, 30 or 50% of his body or something crazy. He had to go to Saudi Arabia for treatment. So, I mean, these world leaders, man, they're in bad shape. And now to finish up, even the ones that didn't get killed, thrown out of office, bombed, burned, or had a stroke or cancer, 2011 is kind of a banner year in that world leaders' opinion polls slipped virtually across the board everywhere. And again, it was just not a good year to be in charge of a country. And you can now go to the rest of the planet, look anywhere from, the United States to the Democratic Republic of Congo to India. Public opinion polls of leaders of virtually every country have gone down. Not all, but a whole lot of them. Barack Obama down in the polls. Nicolas Sarkozy of France down in the polls. Angela Merkel in Germany, although she's wildly popular. People in Europe and the world actually kind of really love her. Her political party's in trouble in Germany, so it's not sure that she's going to survive, just from political circumstances. In the UK, their leader is enacting austerity measures. David Cameron, that are now starting to happen, so services and stuff being cut back in Great Britain, and that's making, of course, him and his political party go down in the polls. You can just kind of go everywhere, and it's like, oh, not fun times for world leaders in 2011, with the exception of places like China, which has done awesome, Brazil, which has done awesome. So Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, high poll ratings. Hu Jintao and his crew in China, high poll ratings. But every place else is like, oh, not so good. So tough year. That's my in other news world review of world leaders and what's happened to them over 2011. Let's wish them better luck in 2012. And in fact, let's take a look at what's up for world leaders in 2012, shall we? Because 2011, to finish, has been a big year of transition, but not transformation. Oh, that sounds too good. Did I really just come up with that? What do I mean by that? Well, all the world leaders I just talked about that have left office or died, okay, and many more who may not make it through 2012, this is a big time of transition, that old people are going away and new people are filling their shoes, but not yet a time of transformation. What I mean by that is all the leaders in these Arab states are going away, but the countries themselves have not transformed into something new yet. None of them are real democracies yet. Maybe they're working towards it. Maybe they're working towards something else. But for all the reasons that all these world leaders are leaving, like Kim Jong-Il dying in North Korea, I mean, he's gone and a new face is taking his place, but no, the North Korean society has not changed. It's not transformed. It's the same. So true transformation has not taken place, simply transition of actual people leaving these countries. Maybe 2012 will be different. And on that note, let's do the next podcast on 2012, looking ahead for what's up with world leaders. How about that? Party on, and Happy New Year.